At the company dinner for couples, the brightness of the night turned into shadows when, from across the room, I saw my wife's boss hold her hand, twist the ring on her fingers until he took it off and, without hesitation, press his lips against hers in a kiss that cut my soul into pieces so small that I didn't even know how to react. I walked to their table with my heart beating like a fire siren, but when I got to them, my lips closed as if my body was no longer mine, and I only found the strength to turn around and leave, leaving behind the muffled sound of laughter and glasses clinking, while inside me everything broke in silence. I went back home without knowing where I was stepping, each step heavy as lead, and I spent the night in the living room, sitting with my elbows on my knees, staring at the ring that I myself couldn't take off my finger, wondering if the love I had experienced up until then had been real or just a lie that had dragged on for years. The memories of the nights we hugged, of the trips we took laughing together, of the afternoons when she told me she loved me more than anything, passed like a cruel film, twisting my stomach and making me feel the bitter taste of betrayal mixed with the salt of my tears, while the question I had never thought to ask echoed in my mind: how can someone who swore eternal love allow another man to touch her with so much desire? The sun rose and illuminated only the ruins of what had been my home, and it was then that I decided that I would not let time heal what could no longer be fixed, but rather that I would take my destiny into my own hands and put an end to that farce of love that was consuming me from the inside out. I sat in my office, opened my computer and wrote, one by one, the divorce letters, each word as painful as a knife cutting through what was left of hope, each sentence confirming that I would no longer accept living as a second option in the life of someone I put first. I wrapped the letters in white envelopes like shrouds and sent them to her house, along with the memories that I could no longer bear to look at. I organized my move in silence, packing not only clothes and objects, but the last sparks of love that, even though wounded, insisted on burning inside me, and I left far away from that address that I had previously called home, but that now reminded me only of the poison of disloyalty. With each kilometer traveled, a weight was lifted from my shoulders, but another was born in my chest, the emptiness of longing and the pain of not understanding how the person who shared my dreams could tear everything apart with such a small impulse compared to what we had built. As I tried to rebuild myself in a new place, surrounded by strangers, I began to understand that I needed to learn to walk alone, to smile without fear that my laughter would sound hollow. In the early days, the silence in the house was a deafening scream, echoing every memory of my marriage, every promise made at the altar, every birthday celebrated, every conversation about the future that would now never happen. The night seemed eternal, the clock mocked me with its dragging hands, and the sheets became the tomb of the man I was, until, little by little, like someone learning to crawl again, I discovered small reasons to get up: hot coffee in the first ray of sunlight, a forgotten book on the shelf, the feeling of walking down a street where no one knew my story. Over time, the pain gave way to a tiredness that, although heavy, was bearable, and this tiredness began to teach me to live without torturing myself with the past. Months passed and one day, when I returned home, I found a car parked in front of my door. I immediately recognized that figure getting out of it, her eyes filled with tears, her breathing quickened, her hands trembling as she held the ring I had left behind. She was looking for me as if no time had passed, as if we could still go back to our old life, but little did I know that, while she was lost in regrets, I had already found someone who made me remember what it was like to be loved without hesitation, without secrets, without fear. She tried to speak, but her voice was just an echo of a past that no longer existed, while my eyes remained steady, observing the one who had once been everything to me, but who was now nothing more than a stranger with whom I had shared memories. There was no longer room for the two of us in the same story, there were no more verses to rewrite, only pages turned and a new life that, finally, I was ready to live. "Please listen to me," she said in a choked voice, holding my arm as if she feared I would vanish into thin air. "You don't need to say anything," I replied quietly, feeling a serenity that I never thought I would find, and then I walked to the door without looking back, because I learned that whoever cheats once doesn't just destroy the relationship, but destroys themselves. Deep in her eyes there was an abyss of regret, a growing panic at the realization that the life she had abandoned no longer existed, and that the glory days when I had waited for her at home were forever in the past. And as she cried alone, sitting on the curb, I understood that the worst punishment for someone who cheats is to discover that the person who was betrayed not only moved on, but became a better person, someone who learned to value themselves to the point of never accepting crumbs of love again. Because it was precisely when I saw her there, so fragile, that I understood that betrayal is a bomb that destroys the betrayed person at first, but that makes the betrayer live in the hell of guilt until the end of his days. But what could have made her show up at my door after so long? What happened in her life that she suddenly decided to look for me? What I discovered about the reasons that led her to cheat will make you understand that, sometimes, the greatest punishment for someone who destroys a true love is to watch, helplessly, as the other person becomes happy without needing them, and that is the part of the story that no one expects to hear. Welcome to the channel where we never support any form of betrayal. All the stories you hear here are fictional, created to show how betrayal can destroy lives, hearts and dreams. Get ready, because today's story will shock you and keep you hooked from start to finish. Buckle up, the truth hurts, and this story will prove it. Enjoy listening. Jonathan had always been a meticulous man, someone who believed that happiness was in the details, in the small gestures that made up a solid and lasting relationship. He worked as a financial manager at a technology company, but his greatest passion was never money, but rather building a life that had meaning. Alongside Emily, his wife, he found meaning in every sunrise, in every coffee shared before work, in every loving note left on the table. Emily, on the other hand, was a woman with an easy smile, known among friends and colleagues for her friendliness that filled the room with light, but who, at home, showed a more introspective side, revealing to her husband dreams that she would never dare share with anyone else. They met during an exchange trip while still at university, when they were both in their early 20s, and fell in love during long late-night conversations in the hostel lobby. From then on, they were inseparable. They moved cities together, shared small apartments, saved penny by penny to buy the house that, over time, they filled with memories that only grew with each birthday, each trip, each personal victory celebrated together. In the neighborhood, they were seen as the ideal couple, the kind of couple who seemed to have found the recipe for eternal love. On weekends, they would host friends for barbecues in the backyard, with Jonathan always taking care of the background music and Emily organizing the dishes and desserts, smiling proudly as she watched everyone enjoy her recipes. On Sunday mornings, they liked to walk through the park near their home, holding hands, talking about their plans for the future, children, trips to exotic places, even the possibility of opening a small cafe together, where they could work side by side. It was on those mornings that Emily felt most connected to him, as if the whole world stopped to watch them walk in step, breathing deeply in the fresh air and exchanging confidences that only made sense to those who shared the same soul. Jonathan's job required long hours at the office, but he always made sure to arrive on time for dinner, bringing Emily flowers every now and then, just to remind her that despite the exhausting routine, she was still his priority. Emily, on the other hand, worked as an events coordinator, a role that put her in constant contact with different people, organizing parties, conferences and corporate meetings. Her attentive eye for detail made her an admired professional, someone who could transform simple environments into charming places. And it was precisely this ability to see beauty where few others could that Jonathan admired most about her. He was proud of his wife not only for her talent, but for the dedication she put into everything she did, from the most grandiose projects to the little surprises she prepared for him, like a candlelit dinner on an ordinary Wednesday night. When they bought their dream home, a building with a light facade, large windows and a garden that bloomed every spring, it seemed like they were sealing the promise of a forever that they both believed in so fervently. The house became a refuge, a place where they felt safe, where they discussed things without fear of judgment and reconnected after tiring days. Each room held stories: the bedroom they painted together on a rainy weekend, the kitchen where they spent hours testing new recipes, the living room where they danced to romantic songs on sleepless nights. To those who looked from the outside, their life was perfect, but to those who knew them closely, perfection came from their mutual effort to keep alive the enchantment, respect and admiration they felt for each other. Close friends, like Daniel and Sophie, often commented on how rare it was to see a couple still exchanging loving glances so many years after their wedding. During get-togethers, it was common to see Jonathan carefully adjusting a lock of Emily's hair or Emily laughing at old jokes that only they understood. This kind of connection inspired those around them, creating an aura around them that, yes, true love existed and stood the test of time. Even though work consumed part of their days, they always found ways to renew the flame, whether with romantic getaways in charming hotels in the mountains or simple walks around the city on moonlit nights. It was as if, even after so many years, they still hungered for each other, still delighted in the daily discoveries, with the nuances that time revealed in their partner. Jonathan, even though he was tired, made a point of listening to Emily talk about her ideas for new event projects, sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of wine while she leafed through supplier catalogs and showed him references for elegant decorations. For him, there was no sound more comforting than the lively voice of the woman he loved, and for her, there was no better feeling than seeing the admiration in his eyes that never seemed to fade. Sometimes she felt insecure, wondering if she was still as desired as before, but all it took was a tight hug from him or a whispered compliment in her ear for the certainty of being loved to magically return. On the other hand, he also had his fears. He was afraid that the routine would drive them apart, that the stress of long days at the office would steal the shine they had achieved together. And so, whenever he could, he created small moments to remind her that she was the woman of his life. On days off, they liked to get in the car and drive around aimlessly, just to listen to loud music, sing together and discover new places. It was on these improvised outings that they felt younger than ever, as if they were back in college when the only thing they cared about was being together. The moments when they stopped at little roadside cafes and laughed at silly things, exchanging absent-minded kisses, were treasured and revisited when they felt homesick during busy days. The car, for them, was almost a confessional, where they shared their fears, hopes and secret plans, and where they cried together when life hit them with bad news, like when they lost a close friend or when Emily got the call that her father needed emergency surgery. Their bond was so great that all it took was a look for them to understand each other in awkward situations, like when they visited family members who kept asking when they were going to have children or when they had to leave parties early to take care of each other. Although they argued from time to time, they never went to bed angry. Even on the worst nights, they always found a way to hug each other, quietly repeating, "I love you," that reconnected them before falling asleep. For Jonathan, Emily was not only his wife, but also his best friend, confidant, adventure partner and guardian of his deepest secrets. For Emily, Jonathan was more than just a husband. He was the anchor that kept her steady on stormy days, the companion who made her laugh when everything seemed to be falling apart, the man she always wanted to grow old with. Mondays were difficult days for both of them, but they had a ritual that strengthened them. After work, they made sure to have dinner together, even if it was just a pizza ordered through the app, while watching old movies in the living room. This little ritual seemed to recharge their batteries, reminding them that, no matter how tiring the week was, they had each other as a safe haven. Fridays, on the other hand, were times of celebration. Jonathan always arrived with a bottle of wine and Emily prepared a special dish, transforming the end of the week into a private party where they toasted not only to their professional achievements, but mainly to the privilege of being together. In the eyes of those who knew them, it was impossible not to see the strength of the love that existed between them, and perhaps it was this certainty that made it even more painful when fate began to draw invisible fissures, opening silent cracks in what seemed to be an unshakable wall of complicity. But at that moment, no one dared to imagine that anything could shake the union of two souls that seemed made for each other. They continued to build their lives with care, decorating every detail of their home, celebrating special dates with trips to historic cities, cultivating loyal friends who shared dreams and glasses of wine, and planning a future where every step would be taken side by side. In that routine, between good morning kisses and tight hugs before going to sleep, Emily and Jonathan genuinely believed that nothing could separate them, that they were immune to the tragedies that struck other couples, that their love was a shield against any evil. They were so certain of what they felt for each other that it never crossed their minds that, at some point, fate could throw a painful choice in their path that would put everything they had built up until then at risk, threatening to transform a solid love into memories that hurt more than anything else. And so, in that setting of neatly lined houses and well-kept gardens, surrounded by neighbors who envied them for being the picture of happiness, Emily and Jonathan continued to write a story every day that seemed too perfect to end in tragedy. Meanwhile, each small gesture, each touch, each promise exchanged on silent nights, built the walls of a castle that, in their eyes, would be eternal. What no one knew was that sometimes fate prepares storms so unexpected that not even the strongest of castles can withstand them. Jonathan was beginning to notice that the sparkle in Emily's eyes seemed more tired, more distant than before, as if something was slowly being lost with every smile she forced during Friday dinners. Small changes began to draw invisible cracks in the life he thought was perfect. Her touches became faster, as if they were just following a ritual. Their once long conversations began to be interrupted by distractions on her cell phone that she couldn't explain, and the enthusiasm she showed when planning the weekends was replaced by a disinterest that he couldn't understand. His heart twisted every time she said she was too tired to go out or when she made up plans that she would never have before without inviting him, but he tried to ignore these signs, convincing himself that their exhausting routine was the only thing responsible for that change that seemed to erode, inch by inch, the complicity they had built. He insisted on preparing surprises, like flowers left on the coffee table or tickets to shows she said she loved, but even when she smiled and thanked him, there was something absent in her gaze, as if her mind was somewhere else, in another world that no longer belonged to her. Emily, on the other hand, felt suffocated in a spiral of emotions that she couldn't control, trapped between the safety of the home she shared with Jonathan and the adrenaline of a desire that invaded her like a forbidden flame. She herself was frightened when she found herself smiling alone when she read messages that arrived late at night, when she felt her heart race at a cell phone ring that didn't come from her husband. When she went to corporate events, she started to stay home much later than she promised, justifying herself with excuses that rang true only because Jonathan would never imagine doubting her. The mornings that used to start with kisses and caresses became silent, filled with a hurried coffee, and the hugs that lasted minutes were now just cold and quick touches, while her head filled with thoughts that she didn't dare confess even to herself. In her heart, the battle between guilt and desire became unbearable, but each time she immersed herself in the scent of another presence, she forgot, even if only for a moment, the man who was waiting for her at home with all the love that had once been her greatest treasure. Jonathan began to realize that Sundays, once sacred to them, had become empty days. Emily would go out alone, saying she needed time to organize her thoughts, walk, and clear her mind, but she would return hours later with a strange expression, as if she had cried or, worse, experienced something he could not even dream of. He tried to look at her eyes, looking for clues that would deny what his instinct was beginning to whisper in his ear, but she would shut herself off with convincing excuses, talking about stress, tight deadlines, and tiredness. Even so, on sleepless nights, he would find himself awake next to her, listening to the breathing that had once brought him peace and that now only reminded him that there was an invisible wall growing between them. Even so, he refused to accept that he might be losing Emily, because he firmly believed that true love could survive any storm, and that all it took was finding the right word, the most tender gesture, to bring her back to him. At work, Jonathan became easily distracted, making mistakes he never would have made before, forgetting important commitments, and receiving worried looks from colleagues who no longer recognized the precise and reliable man he had always been. At home, he tried to compensate for the emptiness with increasingly frequent displays of affection, but every touch, every sweet word, seemed to bounce off an invisible barrier erected by Emily. Little by little, he began to feel afraid of going home, of finding more silence than warmth, more distance than closeness. At night, when they lay side by side, the bed seemed cold, too wide for just two bodies that no longer touched each other like they used to. His hands would reach for her in the darkness, but she would curl up or pretend to sleep, leaving him trapped in an emptiness that grew like an open wound. Still, when dawn came, he would get up determined to fight for her, convinced that everything could be overcome. Emily became increasingly absorbed in secret messages exchanged, in hidden meetings that she justified as work meetings. Her eyes shone differently when she returned home, but not for Jonathan, but for her reflection in a mirror of illusions that made her feel alive and desired in a way she hadn't felt in years. She began to dress more carefully, choosing more striking perfumes, new lingerie that he didn't get to see, but that made her feel seductive. To Jonathan, her scent when he got home seemed strange, mixed with something that didn't belong to him. The first time he noticed this, he thought about asking, but his voice was lost in a lump in his throat that made him smile and change the subject. He was afraid of the answer he might hear and preferred to cling to the hope that everything would go back to normal. After all, their love had always been strong enough to face any difficulty, hadn't it? Every night that Emily said she needed more hours at the office or to meet with colleagues, Jonathan would indulge in a painful ritual. He would turn on the lights in the house, set the table for two, heat up the dinner he had prepared, look at the clock and count the minutes until he heard the keys in the door. When she came in, with apologies and hurried kisses, he pretended not to notice the lack of sparkle in her eyes and the absence of the warmth he needed so much to feel alive. Then, as he washed the dishes alone, he remembered the days when they would laugh together while fighting over who could spill the most water out of the sink. The memories of those happy times made the pain of realizing that the woman he loved was slowly drifting away even more intense, as if each new lie were a nail in the coffin of what they had built together. The doubts grew stronger when mutual friends began to ask about Emily, about how she was doing, about why she seemed so distant and absent at parties and gatherings. Some commented that they saw her in places where it didn't make sense for her to be alone, but Jonathan always interrupted them with forced smiles, saying that she worked hard and that everything was fine. Even when the night ended with him alone in the living room, taking short sips of whiskey to try to find courage, he kept telling himself that it was just a phase, that tiredness was shaping the days and that soon his wife would smile like before. However, inside, with each sleepless night, he felt that something bigger and darker was happening, something that threatened not only the marriage, but also the sanity he fought to maintain. Until the company's couples dinner arrived. Jonathan had carefully planned every detail. He chose Emily's favorite tie, prepared compliments to give her throughout the evening, and imagined that this would be the perfect opportunity to rekindle the love he felt was slipping through his fingers. He prepared himself as if he were preparing for the most important battle of his life, taking a deep breath before entering the elegant room lit by soft lights and decorated with sophisticated arrangements. The atmosphere seemed to invite the celebration of love and companionship, but his inner mood was charged with expectation, anxiety, and silent fear. During the first few minutes, everything seemed normal. They greeted friends, toasted glasses of sparkling wine, and exchanged shy smiles that still reminded him of better days. But as the evening progressed, Jonathan noticed the way Emily avoided his touch, how she sought the presence of another person with her gaze, how her smile opened differently when she spoke to a specific man. The background music didn't drown out the sound of suspicion growing in Jonathan's chest like thunder. He watched Emily's every gesture, the way she fixed her hair, the way she leaned in to listen more closely, the strange gleam in her eyes that he hadn't seen in months but that now seemed lit up by someone other than him. Every laugh she gave sounded like a stab, every subtle touch of her hands on the table fed the monster growing in his mind. Panic began to take hold when he realized that he wasn't just imagining things, that the scene in front of him was real and that the woman he believed to be his lifelong companion was smiling at another man in a way that she hadn't smiled at him in a long time. It was then, in a moment that seemed to happen in slow motion, that he saw her remove her own ring and hand it to the man sitting in front of her. Jonathan's heart stopped beating for an instant, the entire room became a silent blur, and his breathing became heavy as if he were sucking air underwater. Then, as if that were not enough, the man took her hand and, with cruel ease, pulled her into a kiss that, for Jonathan, lasted an eternity. Every second of that gesture was a blow, every movement of their lips stole pieces of everything he believed in, and the pain was so intense that his legs almost gave way. He walked to the table, but the words were lost amidst the whirlwind that exploded in his head. He looked into her eyes and found only surprise and fear, but no shame. Unable to make a sound, he turned and left, leaving behind the night that should have been one of reconciliation and that, instead, would forever mark the destruction of the love he had fought so hard to preserve. The betrayal he never imagined he would face was no longer a suspicion, no longer a whisper of insecurity. It was the truth laid bare in a room full of silent witnesses, forever transforming lives that until then seemed united in an unbreakable destiny. And, deep in Jonathan's heart, not only pain was born, but also the need to discover why all of that had happened, and what secrets were still hidden in the shadows of that relationship he believed to be eternal. The heavy silence that hung over Jonathan's new home was interrupted only by the sound of suitcases being dragged to the car. Every step he took seemed to echo off the empty walls, reminding him of what he had been forced to leave behind, but also of what he was determined to rebuild. After the devastating night at the dinner, he did not return to his old house, preferring to stay for a few days in a hotel until he had sorted out his documents and found an apartment in a distant neighborhood, where no one would know him as Emily's perfect husband. When the dust began to settle and the divorce was official, he signed the papers with the serenity of someone who would not allow pain to define his life. He moved with the firm intention of starting over, far from any memory that could hurt him. What he did not know was that, while he was rebuilding his days in silence, Emily was sinking into a regret that grew like a weed, consuming every certainty that had made her believe she could live without him. Emily's days became long and empty, filled only with the annoying sound of the clock ticking away in a house too big for her alone. Her lover's messages became scarce, short, cold, until they stopped altogether. When she realized that she had exchanged years of complicity and love for a moment of excitement that turned out to be as fleeting as it was cruel. Her phone no longer rang with ardent promises, now it only rang with demands from mutual friends, who demanded to know how she could have done that to Jonathan. The nights she once spent in her husband's arms became sleepless dawns in a room where the echo of her own breathing drove her crazy. She began to revisit him in her dreams, hearing his voice saying, "I love you," with the same intensity she used to ask, in nightmares, why she had destroyed him. The walls, decorated with photos of trips and happy times, now seemed to mock her, transforming each memory into silent stabs. Jonathan, in turn, immersed himself in a process of self-discovery that led him to discover pleasures he had not previously noticed. He began walking around the city, joined a book club, started going to charming cafes where he could read in peace, and met people who did not associate him with a betrayed man, but with someone interesting and full of stories to tell. It was on one of these afternoons that he met Sophia, a woman with a serene smile and sincere gaze who approached him to compliment the book he was reading. Their first coffee turned into long conversations, then into unpretentious dinners, until it became impossible not to desire more. Sophia was different. She was interested in what he said, laughed at his lame jokes, and had a way of looking at him that made Jonathan feel alive again, desired, important. By her side, he discovered that there was still love in the world, he just had to be ready to receive it. As Jonathan walked on, Emily mulled over every detail of what she had lost. It was then that, driven by an uncontrollable anguish, she decided to look for him. After weeks of investigating where he could be, she found the address of his new apartment and parked her car in front of the entrance. She stood there, staring at the door with heavy breathing, repeating to herself the words she would say to try to make him come back. When she finally gathered her courage, she got out of the car, fixed her hair, wiped away the tears that insisted on falling and climbed the steps that separated her from the man who had once been everything to her. She knocked on the door with trembling hands, expecting to hear the familiar sound of his footsteps coming towards her. But when the door opened, it was not just Jonathan who appeared. Next to him, smiling calmly, was Sophia, holding hands with him, wearing a ring that shone under the light in the hallway. Emily felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. Her eyes filled with tears before she could even say a word, while her heart seemed to explode with a mixture of regret and horror. Jonathan held her gaze with a serenity that destroyed her inside, because there was no hate or love there, only the coldness of someone who no longer felt anything. She tried to get closer, holding out her hand, but his expression didn't change. She murmured through her tears that she needed to talk, that she had things to explain, but he just took a deep breath and said in a low but firm voice that there was nothing more to be said. The silence between them weighed like a sentence. Sophia squeezed his hand, in a simple gesture that said it all. He was no longer alone, he no longer needed her, and what they had shared belonged to an irretrievable past. It was then that, in the middle of that suffocating hallway, Jonathan revealed the secret that would make her understand that the life they had once built could no longer be rebuilt. With a controlled voice, he told her that he was moving again, but this time to another country, because he had received a job offer that would change his life. He said that he had accepted the position without hesitation, because he was determined to start over in a place where he would not be haunted by the shadow of the betrayal she had committed. Emily felt her legs give way, holding on to the wall to keep from falling, while he continued saying that not only had he decided to leave, but that he was taking Sophia with him, because he had found in her the peace he had always dreamed of having with his wife. His words fell like hammer blows on her chest, destroying the last hopes she had nurtured during sleepless nights. The revelation that he would leave her forever, that he would be happy in another country with another woman, made her face contort in desperate tears, a sound that echoed through the hallways like an inconsolable lament. She tried to argue, to beg, to say that she still loved him, that she had made a mistake and that she could no longer live without him, but Jonathan just closed his eyes, took a deep breath and replied that a mistake can be forgiven when there is regret before the damage is done, but not after the other person's heart is destroyed. He said that he understood that she felt guilty, but that guilt was not love, and that true love was caring, protecting, never betraying. The words echoed like the sound of a door closing forever, while her face, bathed in tears, revealed the understanding that there was no going back, that no matter how much she insisted, the time she had wasted living a forbidden desire could not be recovered, and the man who had once been hers now belonged to a future that she would never be a part of. Emily's hands were shaking so much that her keys fell to the floor, making a metallic noise that broke the icy silence of the hallway. She knelt down, picked them up slowly and, with her head down, whispered that she never imagined he could forget her so quickly, to which he replied that it wasn't about forgetting, but about not allowing the pain to define him. He said that it still hurt to remember what they had been through, but that, even so, he had chosen to move on to find happiness, because he understood that living trapped in the past would be a second death, and he wanted to live. Emily looked up, searching in his eyes for some remnant of the love they shared, but all she found was the irreversible distance of someone who had already rebuilt his own world. Sophia, who had been silent until then, spoke in a firm but non-aggressive voice, saying that she knew everything that had happened, that she would never deceive him like Emily had, and that, together, they had learned that a healthy love is not built on lies. Emily tried to interrupt, but her voice failed her when she realized that her words no longer had a place in that conversation, that everything she said would only be the echo of a regret that was too late. Her eyes turned red, and, even without the strength to stand, she tried to say that she could still do anything to fix the mistakes, but Jonathan just shook his head silently, indicating that there was nothing left to be saved. As the door slowly closed in front of her, Emily heard only the final click of the latch, a sound that marked the end of everything she had built with him. She stood there, hugging herself as sobs tore through her chest, feeling the loneliness so intense it felt physical, as if the air had been ripped from her lungs. And, amidst the muffled sound of crying that filled the hallway, she understood that, sometimes, the greatest punishment for those who destroy a true love does not come in the form of revenge or anger, but in the cruel silence of those who have moved on, leaving behind only memories that can never be lived again. Emily stood in the hallway for long minutes after the door closed, feeling the coldness of the floor beneath her knees as if the whole world were crushing her. When she finally managed to stand up, her body felt heavier than it had ever felt. Each step to the elevator seemed to require superhuman effort, while her mind echoed the image of Jonathan holding hands with Sophia. The walk to the car was made in a trance, as if floating in a fog of pain. When she got into the vehicle, her hands were still shaking so much that she had difficulty fitting the key into the ignition. The first tear fell silently, followed by a stifled sob that soon turned into a convulsive cry. The mask she had worn for weeks, pretending to herself that she could win him back, collapsed completely. With her head resting on the steering wheel, she cried not only for the man she had lost, but for the woman she had become, someone who had destroyed what she loved most for an impulse that now seemed absurd to her. Meanwhile, in the apartment, Jonathan sat on the couch with Sophia, both of them still silent. The air seemed heavy, charged with the energy of something irreversible that had just happened. Sophia held his hand tightly, as if to remind him that right then and there, the past didn't matter, only the choice they had made to be together. Jonathan took a deep breath, feeling a relief that mixed pain and liberation. Then, finally, he broke the silence. He said he still didn't know exactly how he felt, that seeing Emily so broken had been harder than he had imagined, but that, deep down, he knew it was necessary. Sophia replied that she understood, but that he didn't need to feel guilty about moving on, because it wasn't him who broke up what they had, it was Emily's choices. She spoke calmly, but each word carried the firmness of someone who knew she would build something solid with him, something that wouldn't be stained by lies. The next day, Jonathan decided to go for a walk, needing to process the whirlwind of emotions. He passed by brightly lit storefronts, by cafes where couples laughed and embraced, by squares where families played, and felt a sharp pang of nostalgia for everything he once believed he had. But instead of giving in to sadness, he took a deep breath and kept walking, determined not to be a prisoner of what had happened. He went into a bookstore he had always wanted to visit and lost himself among the shelves, allowing himself to dream of new beginnings. When he came out, he found Sophia outside, holding 2 takeout coffees. She smiled when she saw him, as if she could see beyond his wounds, and the hug they exchanged was like a silent pact that from now on nothing would shake them. They walked together to a nearby park, where they sat on a bench and talked about the future. Jonathan told him that he had received confirmation of his transfer abroad, but that he needed to make sure that she was ready to move to another country with him. Sophia didn't hesitate. She said that wherever he was, she wanted to be too, because she believed in the life they could build together. That same afternoon, Emily went through Jonathan's old messages on her cell phone, rereading vows of love, lifelong promises, photos of happy trips. Each memory burned like fire on her skin, leaving her dizzy, as if regret was consuming her from the inside out. She called her friends, seeking support, but found only dry voices, words that echoed veiled criticism or awkward silences. She realized that, by betraying the man everyone admired, she had also betrayed herself and destroyed the image she had built as a happy and admired woman. She spent the night awake, sitting on the floor of the room she had once shared with him, staring at the empty bed while hugging a pillow that no longer had his scent. The clock ticked on, the hands seemed to mock her pain, marking the time that would never come back. When dawn broke, Emily realized that, more than losing Jonathan, she had lost herself, and that loneliness would be her only companion while the man she loved built a future elsewhere. In the days that followed, Jonathan and Sophia focused on preparing for the move. Boxes piled up in the apartment, each item carefully packed as they brainstormed ideas about how they would decorate their new home. They talked about the neighborhoods they wanted to explore, the cafes they wanted to visit, the little routines they dreamed of creating together. Sophia suggested they buy plants for the balcony, something that would bring life to the place. Jonathan, on the other hand, wanted to hang photos of their travels, symbols that from now on they would be partners not only in the present, but also in the adventures they planned for the future. In every laugh, in every knowing look, it was clear that the past no longer held them back. They were free, and freedom, although hard-won, was now the greatest gift they had. A week before moving, Jonathan went to the house he had bought with Emily, not to try to rescue anything, but to retrieve documents that were still in the office safe. The garden, which had once been full of life with flowers planted by 4 hands, was neglected, the plants wilted, the grass dry. Inside the house, the smell of mold mixed with perfumes that no longer meant anything to her. The silence in the rooms was oppressive, as if it were screaming that the love that had existed there had died and that all that was left was the memory of a broken home. As he gathered the last files, he heard footsteps echoing in the hallway and, when he turned, found Emily standing in the doorway, pale, her eyes puffy, as if she hadn't slept in days. She shook her head slowly, as if she still couldn't believe he was leaving, and asked, in a barely audible whisper, if he had really given up on her forever. Jonathan took a deep breath, holding back the anger that could explode at any moment, and replied that it wasn't about giving up, but about choosing not to suffer anymore. He said he had tried everything to keep her, but that she was the one who let go of his hand. Emily, with a choked voice, said that she loved him, that she had never stopped loving him, but that she had lost herself in something she couldn't explain. He replied that love isn't just about saying, "I love you," but about protecting, caring, respecting, and that those who truly love don't destroy the other. His words were firm, but his eyes were calm, like those of someone who has learned to live without what they considered essential. Emily approached, closing the space between them, but stopped when she saw that he didn't back away or come closer, just stood there, like a stranger, watching her with compassion. She then began to sob, her hands shaking, and said that she regretted it more than anything in life. Jonathan nodded, saying that he believed in her regret, but that regret doesn't erase what was done. He also said that he preferred to remember her as someone he once loved, not as the woman who destroyed the most beautiful love he ever knew. After that last meeting, Jonathan left the house carrying only a briefcase, but leaving behind everything that represented a past that no longer belonged to him. When he arrived at the apartment, he found Sophia sitting on the living room floor, laughing as she packed up cookbooks. Her smile, so simple and full of life, dispelled any shadows that still lingered in his heart. He sat next to her, helping her pack up memories that would now be just theirs. They spent the night talking about their new country, about the language they needed to learn better, about the customs they wanted to embrace. They also talked about fear, about the courage it took to start over, and about the gratitude they felt for having found each other amidst so many missed opportunities. That same night, Emily opened the wedding album, running her fingers through each photo with a longing that hurt more than any physical pain. In each image, she saw two young people in love, two dreamers who believed that nothing could separate them. Tears fell onto the pages, blurring some of the photos, as if the present wanted to erase the past. In an impulse, she slammed the album shut, throwing it away, but when she saw it on the floor, she ran to pick it up and hugged it as if she could bring Jonathan back. But the apartment was empty, and the silence only made the reality that he would never return even more cruel. Days later, Jonathan and Sophia boarded a night flight that would take them across the ocean. As the plane taxied on the runway, he held her hand tightly, exchanging a look that said more than any words. They were ready to live something new, without ghosts, without lies, only with the hope that true love is not immune to pain, but grows stronger when two people decide, together, not to give up on each other. From above, the city lights grew dim until they disappeared into the darkness, taking with them the last connection to a story that, although full of lessons, needed to be left behind so that a new chapter could finally begin. The flight progressed through the night while Jonathan and Sophia looked out the small windows of the plane, observing the moonlit clouds and reflecting on what they were leaving behind. There was a heavy silence in the air, not from discomfort, but from the awareness that they were embarking on a completely new life, carrying the scars of a past that they both knew would never be forgotten, but that would no longer be a burden. Every movement of the plane seemed to mark them, as if each mile traveled was a step overcome towards the freedom to start over. Sophia, with her head resting on his shoulder, wondered if she would be able to make this new destination a home, while Jonathan, in silent thoughts, reviewed everything that had happened, trying to understand where exactly the love that he believed to be unshakable began to crumble. His heart no longer ached as before, but there was still a shadow of sadness that reminded him of how fragile dreams can be when poorly cared for. In the apartment she had left behind, Emily wandered aimlessly through the rooms. Every object seemed to echo voices from a past that insisted on haunting her: the pillows they had chosen together on a fun afternoon, the wine glasses they had bought to celebrate their first wedding anniversary, the wall clock he had installed with such care. All these details, which had once told the story of a solid love, now served as cruel reminders of her own ruin. She spent her days trying to maintain some sort of routine, but the simple act of making breakfast became unbearable, as his absence transformed every corner into a labyrinth of memories. Her friends had drifted away, the invitations to meetings and parties had stopped, and even her co-workers looked at her with a mixture of pity and judgment. Emily began to realize that betrayal destroys not only the betrayed person, but also the betrayer, who is condemned to live with the ruins he has created. Jonathan and Sophia arrived in their new country on a cloudy dawn, with the smell of rain in the air and empty streets that seemed to invite introspection. The first week was a mix of wonder and strangeness. They got lost in the narrow streets, discovered cozy cafes, and laughed at each other's clumsy attempts to communicate in a language that still sounded strange. Sophia, always optimistic, turned every obstacle into an adventure, while Jonathan, still with reservations, was surprised by the lightness she brought to his days. They began to decorate the new apartment with plants and paintings they found at local markets, gradually creating a space that, although small, was already filled with life and complicity. On cold nights, they warmed themselves under blankets while watching old movies, exchanging confidences that brought even closer two hearts that, in other times, might never have crossed. Emily, on the other hand, was silently self-destructing. Some days, she would spend hours staring out the window, unable to even change her clothes or fix her hair. Other days, she would have fits of rage that would make her break objects around the house, as if she wanted to get the pain out of her chest. In the midst of these extremes, a moral dilemma arose that ate away at her. Should she insist on trying to win Jonathan back, even though she knew that his presence would only bring her suffering? Or should she accept that she had lost him forever and use this fall to rebuild herself, even if it was too late to correct the mistakes she had made? In her reflections, she realized that the greatest punishment she could impose on herself would be to not learn anything from what had happened. For the first time, she admitted to herself that love is not just about feeling passion, but also about making sure that the other person never feels alone in the midst of life's storms. Jonathan, during his walks with Sophia, began to feel a peace he hadn't remembered feeling in recent years. There was something in the way she held his hand that dispelled the ghosts of distrust that had haunted him for so long. Sophia spoke about the future with a lightness that made him believe that, even after everything, it was possible to love again without fear of being betrayed. One day, as they walked across a bridge illuminated by the orange lights of dusk, she asked if he still thought about Emily. Jonathan hesitated before answering, but chose the truth. He said that thinking about her was inevitable, because part of who he was had been shaped by the history they had lived together, but that there was no longer any desire, only memories that served as a lesson. Sophia smiled, without resentment, and said that she wasn't afraid of his memories, because she knew they were building something true, something that was fed by trust, not lies. The nights in their new apartment became moments of comfort and discovery. Jonathan and Sophia made plans to visit neighboring cities, to learn the local language together, to set up a small business that would bring them even closer together. In each conversation, they realized that they had the same vision of what partnership means. It's not just about living good days, but also facing hardships hand in hand, leaving no room for secrets or lies. These conversations, sometimes light, sometimes deep, became the basis of a relationship that grew stronger with each dawn. Jonathan began to realize that the life he thought was over was, in fact, just beginning, and that the true strength of a broken heart lies in the ability to open yourself up again to someone who deserves it. Meanwhile, Emily gathered the courage to schedule sessions with a therapist, admitting that she couldn't rebuild what was left of her dignity on her own. The first few appointments were painful, as revisiting each wrong choice brought back shame and guilt. However, over the weeks, she began to understand that, although she could never erase what she had done, she could try to become a better person. The therapist confronted her with questions that made her reflect on the root of her insecurities, on why she had sought in another man something she already had at home, and on how her need for validation had blinded her to the destruction she was causing. Emily began to take responsibility for herself, understanding that, even if Jonathan would never forgive her, she needed to forgive herself in order to move on. And in the process, she also learned that loving someone includes having the courage to let them go when you know you can no longer make happy the person who hurt you so deeply. Jonathan and Sophia's days became as intense as they were light. Together they discovered hidden restaurants on cobblestone streets, took pictures hugging each other in flower-filled squares, and got lost in markets filled with exotic aromas. Each new experience was recorded in small travel notebooks, where they wrote not only about the places they visited, but also about what they felt for each other, about the fear of getting hurt again, about the joy of finding each other amidst the chaos. On one of those afternoons, sitting on a bench near the river that ran through the city, Jonathan opened his heart and told her details that he had never shared with anyone, the moments when he felt like a failure, the darkest thoughts he had when he discovered the betrayal, the fear of never being able to trust anyone again. Sophia listened to him without interrupting, holding his hand tightly, until, when he finished, she said that she would never judge him for how he felt, and that all that mattered was the choice they made every day when they decided to be together. At the same time, Emily began to walk the streets trying to find purpose in small details, a flower growing on a broken sidewalk, a child smiling at her without knowing who it was, a man offering to help her when he saw her hesitating to cross the street. Each act of kindness made her feel that perhaps there was still a chance to find a reason to get out of bed. She began to dedicate herself to her work with greater dedication, not to distract herself, but to rediscover the talented woman who, for years, existed only as a shadow of a relationship. With each event she organized, she sought to do better than before, not to prove something to Jonathan, but to prove to herself that she could still be someone to be proud of. This slow and painful process began to change her view of the world and of who she was. In their new city, Jonathan and Sophia began to be recognized by their neighbors as the smiling couple who always seemed in love. People were enchanted to see them walking hand in hand, exchanging discreet kisses and smiles that brightened even the cloudiest days. At home, the nights were lulled by soft music while they cooked together, sharing tasks and laughing at the mistakes they made in the kitchen. On those nights, they talked about what they had learned from the past, about the importance of never letting pride take the place of conversation, and about how honesty would always be the foundation of what they were building. With each touch, with each hug, it was clear that there was no more room for ghosts, only for the certainty that they had found in each other the chance to start over. Emily, on the other hand, reflected on her greatest moral dilemma: how could she rebuild her life knowing that she had hurt someone who never deserved to suffer? This question consumed her on sleepless days, making her write letters that she would never send, letters in which she apologized not only to Jonathan, but to herself for having become a person she despised. On one of those nights, she got up early, opened the balcony door and let the cold wind carry away the words that she could no longer keep inside. Tears flowed, but there was also a glimmer of hope. If she accepted the pain as a learning experience, she could, who knows, become someone who, in the future, would never repeat the same mistakes. And so, even far from the one she loved, she began to walk her own path to redemption. In the new routine that was beginning to take hold, Jonathan and Sophia discovered the magic of small habits that became their secret rituals: waking up before sunrise to walk along the riverbank wrapped in thick coats, warming their hands on steaming coffees bought from street vendors on the corner, and watching the city slowly wake up, with workers rushing by and bicycles cutting through the morning mist. These mornings were marked by deep conversations, in which they allowed themselves to reveal fears and insecurities of the present, but also dreams that went far beyond what they could see. Jonathan talked about his desire to open a small art gallery with her, while Sophia said that she imagined writing a book about loves that are reborn after chaos. These plans, whispered in the silence of dawn, strengthened the bond between them more than any grand gesture could do, because they showed that they had the courage to plan a future together, despite the scars they carried. One day, while strolling through a bohemian neighborhood known for its antique fairs, they stopped in front of a thrift store that displayed a collection of old cameras in its window. Sophia, her eyes shining with excitement, convinced Jonathan to go in, saying that she wanted to record each stage of that new beginning in a unique way. At the back of the store, they found a camera that seemed to have stories to tell, with signs of use that made it even more special. As they tried out the equipment right there, taking spontaneous photos of each other, they laughed at themselves like two teenagers in love. The salesman, a gentleman with a white beard and a kind gaze, watched the couple tenderly, as if recognizing genuine love, and commented that some people spend their whole lives searching for what they seem to have found. The man's words, simple and sincere, echoed in Jonathan's heart, who at that moment realized that he no longer needed to be afraid of loving deeply again. As the new couple grew closer, Emily decided to take a trip alone to a seaside town she used to visit with Jonathan in past summers. The idea was to face the ghosts that insisted on haunting her, revisiting the places where they had been happy to understand, once and for all, that those places no longer existed. The first day was almost unbearable. Every street, every restaurant, every sunset made her relive moments that tore at her soul like blades. However, on the second day, something changed. As she sat alone on one of the benches on the pier, watching the rough sea, she began to feel that the pain was turning into acceptance. The wind ruffled her hair as she reflected quietly, confessing to herself that, despite everything, she still had value as a person, and that she could no longer allow guilt to define her forever. For the first time, she was able to look at the sea without seeing only the reflection of who she had been, but also the possibility of who she could become. In their new home, Jonathan and Sophia organized a dinner with some neighbors who had become friends, creating a social circle that made them feel part of something bigger. The table was carefully set, candles scattered around illuminated the room with soft light, and the chosen music brought smiles and lively conversations. During dinner, between raised glasses and shared dishes, Jonathan realized that he no longer felt like someone running away from a painful past, but rather like someone who was building, in every detail, a life he had always dreamed of. As Sophia got up to bring dessert, he watched her with admiration and gratitude, knowing that none of what they experienced would have been possible if she had not had the courage to leave behind what made him suffer. When the night ended, hugging each other on the porch, he whispered in her ear that he never wanted to live in a place where he didn't feel at home again, and that, with her, every corner of the world could be home. Emily, back in the city, began volunteering at a shelter for women who had faced situations of violence and abandonment. Contact with stories of suffering that went far beyond her own pain brought forth an empathy that transformed her day after day. She began using her skills as an event planner to promote fundraising fairs, charity art nights, and donation drives, discovering that she could be of service to others, even though her heart was still broken. One afternoon, while mentoring younger volunteers, she found herself smiling for the first time in a long time, without it being a mask to hide her sadness. That little smile made her realize that life didn't have to be just about the love she had lost, but also about everything she could offer the world from what she had learned. On weekends, Jonathan and Sophia would take trains to neighboring cities, exploring museums, ancient castles, street markets, and cafes tucked away in charming alleyways. Each new experience was a step away from everything that had hurt them, a reminder that love doesn't have to be perfect to be true, but it does need to be cultivated carefully so as not to be lost. On one of these outings, when they saw an elderly couple walking hand in hand through a tree-lined square, Sophia asked him if he thought they would reach that age together. Jonathan, holding her by the waist, said that if it were up to him, they would do much more than just grow old together. They would create memories, overcome fears, and learn every day to appreciate what they had. Sophia responded with a lingering kiss, as if sealing a silent promise that, as long as there was respect and affection, they would be by each other's side. One rainy afternoon, Emily felt the need to revisit her therapist to share how she had been feeling since her trip. When she entered the office, she noticed that there was something different about her posture. She sat up straight, spoke more firmly, and recounted achievements, such as being able to smile without pretending, or helping women who, like her, had lost their way. The therapist congratulated her on each step, reminding her that it was not about erasing the past, but about giving it a place that did not dominate her present. Emily cried, but this time her tears were not just of pain, but of relief at realizing that, even if she would never be forgiven by Jonathan, she could still find peace and rebuild her dignity. When she left the office, she took a deep breath, feeling that the weight on her shoulders was lighter, and that, despite everything, there was still life ahead. One night, Jonathan and Sophia decided to attend a soiree at a bookstore they had discovered. The space was small but cozy, with hanging lights that illuminated the shelves full of books in different languages. There, people read poetry, played guitar, and shared stories of love, loss, and new beginnings. When it was his turn to speak, Jonathan hesitated, but encouraged by Sophia, he went up on the small improvised stage. His voice, which was shaky at first, gained strength as he told, without mentioning names or details, how he learned that love is not only about passion, but also about respect, and that only those who have the courage to start over discover the true face of love. When he finished, the applause was timid but sincere, and when he got off the stage, he was welcomed by Sophia with a hug so strong that it seemed capable of erasing any painful memory. Emily, in another part of the city, spent her nights on long walks, rediscovering places she used to frequent with Jonathan. In each bar, square or illuminated street, she made peace with her memories, understanding that pain no longer needed to be her guide. On one of these walks, she ran into a friend she hadn't seen since the breakup. The conversation, initially awkward, ended up flowing, and for the first time Emily spoke calmly about everything she had experienced, without trying to justify herself, just accepting the consequences of her actions. Her friend, touched by her sincerity, offered support and suggested that they meet more often, awakening in Emily a hope of rebuilding bonds that didn't need to die with the end of the marriage. Jonathan and Sophia, upon returning from a weekend in a small seaside village, found a letter at home from the country they had left behind. It was a letter from the lawyer informing them that all the formalities of Jonathan's separation had been officially concluded, with no further legal or financial issues. Reading those lines brought them both such an intense feeling of liberation that, even though they were tired from the trip, they hugged each other at the door of their house for long minutes, smiling with relief. That night, they toasted with cheap wine bought at the local market, laughing about how the best achievements are those that arrive quietly, without fanfare, but completely transform the way of life. Meanwhile, Emily, on an impulse, decided to write a letter to Jonathan, not to ask him to come back, but to thank him for the good years they had shared and to tell him that, despite everything, she wanted him to be happy. She wrote each line with tears streaming down her face but without hesitation, putting on paper everything she had learned from the pain and sincerely wishing that he would find peace and love. She carefully sealed the envelope, but when it arrived at the post office, she decided not to send it. Instead, she put the letter in a box she came to call her healing box, where she kept memories, letters, and notes that would help her remember who she had been and, most importantly, who she no longer wanted to be. Jonathan and Sophia woke up unhurriedly on a bright morning, opened the windows to let the sun in, and prepared a simple but joyful breakfast together. They ate fresh fruit, laughed at Sophia's attempts to learn expressions in the local language, and made plans for the following weekend. Jonathan realized that he no longer felt afraid when making plans. There was security in thinking about tomorrow with Sophia by his side. When they finished eating, she pulled him to dance in the middle of the kitchen, twirling to the sound of a song playing softly on the radio. In that moment, enveloped in light and laughter, they felt that they were finally ready to write the next part of the story together. Autumn was beginning to paint the streets with shades of gold and copper, while Jonathan and Sophia walked side by side through the park that had become their favorite refuge since they arrived in the new city. The cold wind carried the scent of fallen leaves, and each step marked not only the rhythm of a walk, but the rhythm of hearts that had learned to rebuild themselves. That day, they stopped in front of a lake with calm waters, where ducks swam lazily under the soft light of the sunset. Jonathan took a deep breath, turned to Sophia and, with trembling hands, took out a simple but meaningful ring from a small box, asking her to accept to continue by his side, not only as a companion for light days, but as a partner for life. Sophia, with teary eyes and the most sincere smile he had ever seen, said yes without hesitation, and in that embrace they sealed not only the promise of a future, but the victory over everything that made them doubt that they were still capable of love. In the following days, Jonathan felt that each morning was like a gift that he had never dared to imagine in the worst moments of his grief. The feeling of walking through unknown streets next to someone who insisted on holding his hand, sharing plans and fears, was a reminder that, even after being destroyed by the one he loved most, it was still possible to find in another heart the courage to start over. He dedicated himself to learning the local language with enthusiasm, helped Sophia set up the small art studio they had dreamed of and began to feel, for the first time in a long time, proud of the person he was becoming. The nights always ended with a glass of wine, endless conversations, and dreams that were renewed with each whisper exchanged in the dim light of the room lit only by the city lights reflected in the window. Emily, for her part, continued with her activities at the shelter, but the emptiness at home was a constant reminder of what she had lost. One Friday night, she decided to go out alone to a restaurant where she had celebrated birthdays with Jonathan, as a way to confront the pain that still held her back. She sat at a table near the window, ordered the wine she usually shared with him, and watched the street while discreet tears with the napkin in her hands. When the waiter, noticing the sadness in her eyes, asked if she would like company, she smiled gratefully but politely declined, because she understood that no gesture of kindness could fill the hole she had dug in her own chest. She paid the bill, walked away aimlessly, and, passing a jewelry store, saw her reflection in the glass and barely recognized herself. She had aged years in just a few months, her eyes no longer sparkled as they once did, and the confident woman she had once been seemed to have been buried in a past that could never be unearthed. In Jonathan and Sophia's apartment, the boxes finally disappeared, the walls gained color, and every corner exuded warmth. They began to invite new friends over for dinners that ended in laughter and secrets, transforming the house into a home full of life. On one of those nights, while organizing books on the shelf, Sophia found, among old papers, a photo of a younger Jonathan, smiling next to someone she knew was part of a painful chapter. Instead of asking, she simply hugged him from behind and said that his past was part of the man she loved, but that it was in the present that she wanted to live with him. Jonathan, moved, kissed her hands and replied that her choice to love him, without judgment, was the greatest gift he had ever received. At that moment, they both understood that they did not need to fear ghosts, because what they had was strong enough to illuminate even the darkest corners of their stories. Emily, on the other hand, began to receive news from mutual friends who had learned that Jonathan had remarried and that, with his new wife, he seemed happier than ever. Each message came like a poisoned arrow, reminding her that life went on for those who did not cling to the past. On nights when the silence in the house became deafening, she wrote long letters in her journal, reflecting on how betrayal not only destroys a relationship, but also the very ability to trust herself. She began to question whether she would ever be able to love again, or whether guilt would follow her like an eternal shadow. Still, in small moments, she saw glimmers of hope, like when she was able to help a woman in the shelter find her confidence again, or when she found herself laughing alone as she remembered something good she had experienced before everything fell apart. Jonathan and Sophia, growing closer, decided to take a vacation and travel by train through neighboring countries, taking only backpacks, cameras, and open hearts for experiences that would mark them forever. In the landscapes that passed by the windows, in the encounters with people from such different cultures, they discovered that their love grew stronger not only in the comfort of their home, but also in the uncertainties of the roads they traveled together. At one of these destinations, they stopped at an old chapel on top of a hill, entered hand in hand, and silently thanked each other for having found each other after so much pain. In that sacred place, without formal promises, but with looks that said it all, they renewed their commitment to never allow pride or fear to erase what they felt for each other. Meanwhile, Emily decided to move to another neighborhood, looking for a fresh start away from suffocating memories. The new apartment was small, overlooking a square where children ran around carefree, and although she felt lonely in the first few days, she found comfort in watching life happening outside. She bought plants to decorate the living room, painted the walls in soft tones and began studying photography, an activity she had always wanted to explore but had put off for years. On clear afternoons, she would go out with her camera in hand to capture moments of beauty that made her realize that, even in the midst of chaos, the world still offered reasons to smile. Little by little, she got to know neighbors, exchanging shy words that, over time, turned into conversations that helped her remember that, even though she was broken, she was still capable of connecting with other human beings. Jonathan and Sophia, already adapted to their new routine, decided to open a small cafe gallery on a busy street corner, combining his passion for art and hers for cooking. The space, decorated with paintings by local artists and rustic wooden tables, soon became a meeting point for locals and travelers looking for a hot cup of coffee and good stories. Between serving people and talking, they found pleasure in building something together, something that not only supported them financially, but that symbolized the daily choice to love, respect and dream. Sophia, on a night when they were closing the cafe later than usual, said that she never imagined she could be so happy with someone who, despite being marked by pain, had the courage to open up to true love. Jonathan, moved, replied that the greatest proof of strength is not enduring alone, but finding someone with whom to share pain and joy. On a sunny Saturday, Emily accepted an invitation from a group from the shelter to take part in a field trip to a cultural center. During the visit, while observing exhibits about stories of overcoming difficulties, she felt a pang of pride for not having given up on herself. One of the women in the group, who had become a close friend, held her hand and thanked her for helping her find the courage to smile again. It was in this simple gesture that Emily realized that, despite everything, there was still a purpose in her existence. She returned home with a warm heart, aware that she could never erase the past, but that every action she took from then on could be different, better, more truthful. Jonathan and Sophia received the news one winter night that they were expecting their first child. They were overcome with emotion and hugged each other in tears of joy. At that moment, the man who once believed he had lost everything understood that life not only rewards those who do not give up, but also surprises them with gifts they had never dared to dream of. Sophia, upon seeing his happiness, said that the baby would be raised in a home where love would not be just words, but daily practice, and that he would learn that respect and truth are the basis of any lasting relationship. Emily, on the other side of the world, held in her hands a letter from Jonathan that had arrived unexpectedly. In it, he did not speak of love or longing, but thanked her for everything he had learned from the pain she had caused, acknowledging that, without it, he might never have found the strength to build the life he had today. The letter ended with sincere wishes that she too would find peace and rebuild her happiness. Emily cried for a long time, not because she wanted him back, but because she finally understood that they were both free. She felt grateful for having had the chance to learn from her mistakes and, silently, wished that Jonathan and Sophia would have the full life they deserved. And so, on paths that followed opposite directions, each one found the destiny they built with their choices. Jonathan, with the courage to love again, Sophia, with the generosity to heal wounds that were not hers, and Emily, with the difficult but liberating mission of finding forgiveness within herself. This story proves that betrayal does not only destroy the moment, but reverberates like an earthquake capable of destroying dreams and affecting those least expected. Leave a comment with your thoughts on this story, share your opinion, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more moving stories like this one. Think about it, betrayal is a wound that goes far beyond the couple, it destroys families, hopes, and the trust that takes years to build. And remember, this channel does not support any type of betrayal.